He has acre.
Let's go.
Welcome back to the Just Like You and Me podcast. This is our 40th episode now. We have Dominic here with us. Dominic, it's great to have you.
Hey, it's good to be here. How you guys doing?
We're doing really good. I was going to say your last name, but I totally forgot how to pronounce it. So we didn't mess up at all.
Good for you guys.
That's one struggle I do have. But yeah, it's great to have you on. I've known you for a little while now. We met at V3 maybe a couple months ago.
Yeah.
And then you came into the Catholic Church, and you're also starting a Rosary company.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a lot of really cool things we want to cover, and I think obviously we should probably start with your conversion. So what religions were you before, and then how'd that story go?
Yeah, so before we even get into like denominations and all of this stuff, I think it might be wise to start out with like, how did I believe in God? Perfect. So coming to know God started when I was about 6th grade. My grandpa had a aneurysm around his spine. Messed up his back pretty bad. He couldn't walk, talk, eat even right. So it's one of those things where it's like when he got sick, he had to essentially learn how to do everything all over again. And it became one of those things where the doctors did not think he was going to recover as well as he did. So it's one of those things where it's like every time it was a new milestone, every time he met a new goal, it was just further proof to me that it's like, this isn't just like a typical healing. This is like a miracle that I am witnessing right now. So it's one of those things where this is also when we started going to church. My grandpa attended Shepherd of the Valley Lutheran Church down in the Dover area of Ohio. So it's one of those things where it's like, that's kind of where I started to get to know God a little bit. It's like, as my grandpa was getting better, we started going to church more, and I kind of just linked the two together. So it's one of those things where it's like, you have this really, really powerful healing, and I'm associating it with Jesus. My grandpa then passed away a couple months later, and it was tough on the family. We didn't really go back to church too much until I met this woman named Marie. Marie was my piano teacher. First lesson I have with her, she's like, all right, so what music do you do outside of playing piano? And I'm like, well, I sing. And she's like, oh, you sing? What part do you sing? I'm like, I sing bass. And she's like, oh, you sing bass? Like, do you go to a church right now? I'm like, no, but I'm open to going back. Like, we just stopped going with my grandpa, but like, I have nothing against the church. We just stopped going. So she's like, oh man, we need a bass in my choir right now because one of my basses fell down some stairs and actually broke his neck. And I'm sitting here like, oh wow, this is horrible. So she's like, do you want to come and sing with us? So I started singing with them, and yeah, I stuck with them for about 5 years up until I converted into the Catholic Church. So it was one of those things where it's like, I started learning more about God, more about Jesus, more how to pray through this church choir. I brought down the average age of that group by about 10, 12 years. I get along with old souls very well. I've had many people tell me that I am an 80-year-old man trapped in a 21-year-old's body. So that's kind of where I got to know God, was my grandpa getting sick, getting better, and then meeting this church choir lady who brought me into her community. In terms of how I got to Catholicism, though, is a completely different ballgame altogether. So this starts about February of 2021. So I get a call from my admissions counselor at Walsh, and she's like, hey, Dom, just a heads up, you got a full tuition scholarship to Walsh University. Congratulations. Not many of my kids have gotten this, so I wanted to let you know this personally. I'm like, oh, well, thank you so much, Joanna. I really appreciate this. So this really tedious college search that I had been on finally came to an end. I'm just like, they made me an offer I can't refuse. They really are the Godfather. So I go in to Walsh, and I hear the campus ministry is doing an event over the summer. And I'm like, this could be a great way to meet some new people. So I go there. They were doing this mass, so I got there about 30 minutes early because if you're late to mass, you are not coming back from that. So I get there about 30 minutes early, and right out the gate, I noticed that Catholics and Lutherans do things a little bit differently from one another. So they had adoration going on. So it's one of those things where it's like, I got there 30 minutes early, and they do adoration about 30 minutes before. the Mass starts. So here they are. They're like, please kneel. So I start kneeling. And like the music minister is like all the way in the back. She's kneeling too. And then they like bring out Jesus. And I had no idea what was going on at this point. Like I did no research beforehand. So here I am. I'm just absolutely confused as all get out. Like what's going on here? And I kid you not, they didn't tell me to stop kneeling, so I just kneeled for like a solid 15 minutes straight, and I eventually look back at the music minister, and she's just on her phone in the back, and I'm just like, hey, can I stop kneeling right now? And she's like, yes, you can stop kneeling right now. So we go through Mass, and like the structure of the Mass is very similar between the Lutheran and Catholic traditions, so I didn't have too much of a problem following it. But I will say this, we also don't use bells when we're trying to get people to pay attention during the words of institution. So I'm really getting into the words of institution. Like that's my moment to like really be like, oh yeah, no, like we're remembering the sacrifice that God made. And then I hear these bells ringing and I'm just like, what's going on right now? Like I was so frustrated. I'm just like, the differences were just so much and no one really explained to me what was going on. So I get out and they're like, how was it? I'm like, I have a lot of questions. So as time goes on, I start asking more questions from my campus ministry people. And generally speaking, they were like very open to like answering the questions. Like I wasn't asking anything super hard. It's just like, hey, why do Catholics do this? Like, why do you guys ring bells when you say the words of institution? Why do you do like all these little things? Like just like these little differences that I was noticing that like, I wasn't necessarily offended by. I was just confused by. So it's one of those things where it's like the curiosity was there. So I heard that RCIA was going on at Walsh's campus. And my freshman year, I'm like, you know what? I'm not really in the mood to convert. I'm not really at a place where I think that's a good idea. But I also think that if I'm going to be here for 4 years and I'm going to be interacting with the Catholic student populace, I think it's a wise idea for me to go learn what the Catholics believe and hear it from their own voice, because there's a lot of misinformation out there about like Protestants saying what Catholics believe versus Catholics saying what they believe. And it's like, do even real Catholics know what they believe sometimes? Like I had seen that Pew Research study that it's like 2/3 of Catholics don't even believe in the real presence in the Eucharist. So I'm just sitting here like, I need to hear it from a priest. I need to hear it from like some vetted sources. So I'm just like, RCIA seems like the place to go. So I told the priest point blank, I'm just like, hey, I'm not here to convert. I'm just here to learn more. I just want to hear y'all out. So we go through it, and eventually we get to this guy. He was a former Calvinist turned Catholic, and I'm like, oh, I'm interested in hearing what he has to say. Like, we're not the same denomination by any stretch of the imagination. Like, Calvinists, they believe some wild stuff that I never have really brought myself to believe. But I'm like, you know what? Like maybe he has some insight that might be helpful to me. It was not a great talk. I'll be honest with you. In that talk, he had said that all Protestants were liars, that they believed in predestination, and that they all believed in a symbolic Eucharist. All three of those things were wrong. So I had opened my heart up to the Catholic Church, and I felt like they took it and just stomped on it. So I'm just sitting here like, okay, if this is how we talk about Protestants when they think we're not looking or they think that they can get away with it, I don't want any part in this. So I stopped going to RCIA. I stopped really hanging out with a lot of campus ministry. And it wasn't until October 31st, 2021, where I had sent a text to a friend of mine, and I was in church for about 4 hours that day. Really was feeling the Holy Spirit move through me, and I said to her, Happy Reformation Day. She responds with, and this is a direct quote, "Eat my rosaries." So it was at that moment I'm like, wait, there are people here who can like kind of joke around with their faith, like kind of can have some fun with it. Like, okay, not all the people here are just completely out to get me. Like some of these people here genuinely want to have some fun. So that's kind of what opened me back up to the Catholic Church, was like this borderline blasphemous statement from this trad woman. So she had went to Austria the next semester, and like we had done a little bit of conversing about the faith. Like she had got me back to a point where it's like I could at least open up to the faith at that point. But she's in Austria, and quite frankly, we weren't talking much at that point because she's an ocean away, and here I am at Walsh just trying to figure everything out. So I started taking adoration hours, just trying to increase my own prayer life, trying to like figure things out, because I'm like, okay, going to mass, going to campus ministry events, some of it's working, but it's not getting me to where I want to go. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take an adoration hour. This is what I need to do. So I took an adoration hour, and normally, like, when I pray, I sing. Like, going back to when I came into the church, that's how I first learned to pray, was singing songs about Jesus to Jesus. When I went into that chapel for the first time for adoration, I was speechless. I couldn't even bring myself to sing. I don't know what it was. Like, maybe it was just a sign in front that said, like, you need to maintain a reverent silence. Like, it didn't stop me later. I still sing to Jesus sometimes during my holy hours at 3 a.m. But that first time, there was just something about it that's just like, I just need to be in awe of what I am seeing right now. And there was just a genuine level of peace that came with it. So it's one of those things where I'm just like, okay, I can accept the Catholic perspective at this point. I can live with this. I can move forward. But I needed to understand it more intellectually. So over the summer, my friend had came back, and I was interested in going to a Latin Mass. I knew she was more traditional. I knew she was more in that boat. And I'm like, you know what? Like, this is an interesting thing that I think I could learn about. So we agreed to go to a Mass at St. Paul's up in Akron. And I got there 30 minutes early, because if you're going late to Mass, you are not coming back from that. Like, my mindset hasn't changed on this, even 1 year later. And I get there, and I see there's, like, some people praying the Rosary. I'm like, oh, I'm vaguely familiar with this. Like, I have one of these. Like, someone at Walsh gave me one. So I'm like, oh, I can go in here. Here's the thing. All trad women dress exactly the same way from behind. So they're all wearing veils. They're all wearing, like, pastel tops, and they're all wearing floral skirts. And I go in.
That's so beautiful, because you're spot on.
So I go in here, and there's this one girl. She's sitting in the pews. There's enough room for, like, one person to move in next to her. And I'm like, you vaguely look like the person I'm supposed to be here to meet. So I genuflect next to the pew, as one does. I'm like, oh, wow, I'm being all Catholic. Look at me. Like, and then she says, like, Holy Mary, Mother of God. I'm like, you are not the person I'm here to meet. So at this point, like, I'm in an awkward position where I'm still genuflecting, and I can either, like, sit down next to this girl and make it even more awkward, or I can just, like, take the walk of shame out of the chapel and realize I have no idea what I'm doing. I took the walk of shame. It was tough. So I walk on out, and I see this table full of missals. Now, if you would have told me a year ago that I would have seen a table full of missals at a Catholic church, I would have thought we were in, like, a war zone or something like that. But here I am. I'm just like, oh, missals. I heard about these. These are supposed to, like, help you understand the difference between, like, the Latin and the Novus Ordo Mass. Like, I can figure this out. I go through. There's no Latin in there. So I'm just sitting here. So I see my buddy Andrew Ertl walk in. And I'm just like, Andrew, how am I supposed to use one of these things? He's like, those won't help you here. And just walks into the chapel. He just left me high and dry. So at this point, I am praying for God to, like, strike me down with lightning, because I had a massive crush on this girl at this point. Like, I'm sitting here like, wow, like, this girl is, like, incredibly based. She is incredibly devout. She's also very funny. I'm just like, wow, this girl is incredible, and I'm about ready to blow it at this Mass. Like, all 2 words of Latin that I remembered from high school are not going to help me here, and I know it. Like, so she gets there, and we sit in the pew, and the priest there was not mic'd, and he's not facing the congregation, because you don't do that during Latin Mass. So at this point, I'm just like, okay, I can't hear the priest. I don't know what's going on. I just put down the kneeler, and I just prayed through the whole thing. So I just prayed through the whole thing, and, like, once or twice I kind of prayed that God would, like, send some lightning down and just, like, make it all over. But for the most part, it was just like, okay, God, here I am. How can I love you a little bit better? I paid attention during the readings and the homily, but after that, just put the kneeler down and just start praying again. And we get done with the Mass, and she's like, I almost forgot you were Protestant for a moment. And I'm just like, really? I was vaguely aware of it the whole time. So she's like, no, you just prayed through the whole thing. I'm like, I thought you were like supposed to pay attention during the Mass. And she's like, no, you can pray through the Latin ones. And I'm like, what? Like, why didn't anyone tell me this? So I get in the car and I call my mom, and she's like, oh, how was it? And I'm just like, Mom, that was the worst worship service I've ever went to in my entire life. She's like, oh, come on, it couldn't have been that bad. I'm like, you're right, it was significantly worse. So you might think I hate Latin Mass after that, but I don't. I actually really love it. The campus ministry had taken a trip down to the Dominican
House of Studies.
Yes, we went down to the Dominican House of Studies, and they were putting on a Mass for St. Dominic. That was one of the coolest things I've ever seen in my entire life. The chant was done so well. They had a scholar choir there that was absolutely beautiful. I mean, hats off to everyone there that day. They put on a really good Mass. It moved me. Like, I'm sitting here like I don't know everything that they're saying, but I was moved. I was genuinely impressed. They also had a relic there. I think it was of a blessed, I forget who it was. It was a piece of human heart. So they're like, okay, we can touch you with this and you can receive a blessing. So they put this relic on me, and I felt a chill go down my spine. And I'm sitting here like, this is either the Holy Spirit or the heebie-jeebies. I don't know which one it is, and I don't. And the priest looks at me. He's like, yeah, you can kiss the relic if you want. I'm like, no, thanks. I'm good. I walk back. I'm like, too Catholic. I'm not ready for this yet. So it was at that point where it was like, you had that going on. So I was like understanding the spiritual element of it, but I was also trying to understand the historical element of it as well. So over the summer, I had stumbled upon this Gnostic text. This is the first Gnostic text I had ever stumbled upon. It's called The Acts of Paul and Thecla. This story is absolutely wild. I actually talked to Jack Franceschi about it, and I think I might be doing a Theology on Tap on it. But to briefly summarize, Thecla was a saint of the early church. She was about as popular as, like, say, Saint Therese of Lisieux is today. Like one of the big female saints of the early church that a lot of people asked for intercession from. And we knew nothing about her. We didn't really know a whole lot about, like, her Gnostic text, and, like, there was a whole lot of controversy about it in the early church, and I'm just getting surrounded by all of this, and I'm asking people for help, and everyone's like, Dom, who's Thecla? And I'm just sitting here like, okay, so I've gone so far off the deep end that even the Catholics can't help me. Yeah. This is great. So, but I'm just sitting here like, I have these questions. I can't just leave them unanswered. So I started doing more research. I started doing more digging, and through it all, I was able to figure out, like, the development of, like, the canonization of saints. I was able to learn about, like, why are people saints? What's the canonization process? How has that changed over time? I also learned about some of the early church fathers. Like, how did they operate? Like, why did they operate the way that they did? It was genuinely fascinating. I could talk your ear off for hours on this topic. I absolutely love it. The early church is just so fascinating. My goodness. So eventually I start finding peace with this. And at Walsh, I start going back and, like, I start talking with people about this more and more. And eventually they're like, oh, Dom, you like researching church history. How about you do this research on, like, the Inquisitions? And I'm just like, oh, that 600-year period of Catholic history? The Inquisitions were in the church longer than Protestants have even been around. So I'm sitting here like, oh, sure, why not? The girl was cute, okay? Like, don't judge me. So I'm doing research on the Inquisitions, and, you know, I didn't like everything that I found. A lot of Catholic history, like, a lot of it's good, but some of it can be not so good. You don't always like everything you find. So trying to reconcile, just like, how can a church that professes love do some really, really heinous things? Like, how do you reconcile all of that? And, you know, that was something that I kind of struggled with, and a lot of people noticed that I had struggled with. I went back to RCIA because at that point I was starting to trust the church more. Wasn't ready to convert at that point, but I was ready to at least hear them out, learn more about the theology from their perspective. And you know what, like over time, I just came to trust the fact that it's like, you know what, like there are going to be people who do bad things. There are going to be people who aren't going to make the right calls, but that doesn't make the faith less true. But there was
that's too controversial of a acceptance. You can't just accept bad people doing bad things.
But that's what we're called to do,
Right.
Like that's the thing. Like in many respects, by dealing with frustrating, sometimes terrible things, we learn how to follow Christ better. Like true faith isn't built through clean and easy stories and solutions. It's built sometimes through adversity. It's built sometimes through the hardest stuff that we deal with. And yeah, it can be very frustrating. And I've definitely worn that frustration on my sleeve. I met a girl through RCIA and we started dating. And a month in, we had like a serious talk. She's like, I don't think this is going to work. You're a Protestant. I'm a Catholic. And I'm just sitting here like, you met me in RCIA. Like, what? I don't understand what the problem is. That's like saying, you know, I don't think this is going to work. Like, you don't like cheese. You're lactose intolerant. And I'm like, you met me at a cheese store. Yeah. I've clearly figured out a way or two to like get around that. Like, so that was a hard conversation. But if I'm being charitable and if I'm being honest with myself, like there was a lot of frustration with the church at that point. There was a lot of frustration that was holding me back. Like, and that made things challenging. It's like, how do you reconcile all that stuff? And like, while I had intellectually reconciled it, emotionally, I was still kind of processing because it's like, I want to be able to defend this with all my heart. And like, I don't want to say that like I was molding my heart to like defend the indefensible or whatever, but I was molding my heart to accept the fact that it's like being a part of the Catholic Church means accepting that the church hasn't always done everything that I've wanted it to do or how I maybe would have liked to handle it. So like putting yourself in a position where it's like you are trusting an organization created by Christ with your soul. That is a big ask. That's a really big ask. And like, that's something that I was still kind of processing. And going into the summer of my sophomore year, I kind of I didn't really spend too much time with it. I was pretty busy. I was working about 50, 60 hours a week. So it was one of those things where my faith life really just kind of cratered. I don't want to say that I stopped going to church or anything like that. I still went, but it just didn't feel as real. It didn't feel as this is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's more just like I'm kind of going through the motions. Like I'm more focused on work. I'm more focused on school. I'm more focused on all these really hard questions, like making friends, all these different things. And when I came back for my junior year, it was kind of put on full display. The first week back of my junior year was pretty tough. I had found out that my uncle had just gotten diagnosed with lung cancer, and he was a smoker in his 70s at that point. So I knew there wasn't a lot of time left. And that same day, I had also found out that my ex had like started dating another dude. So I'm just kind of sitting here like, wow, this is just a double whammy. And like, I had missed my brother at that point, and it was just like this whole sad thing. And those first 6 weeks, like until he passed, they were tough. They were really, really tough. God felt pretty far away at that point. And I realized like at Agape, because he had passed away the same weekend that we were doing our retreat at Walsh. We call it Agape. First time I had ever went on a retreat, period, end of story. Hopefully it's not the last. I don't think it will be. But I went on this retreat, and it was kind of at that moment that I realized that like my faith life was kind of taking a crater. It was going in a direction that I didn't want it to go. It was going in a direction that needed to change. So afterwards, I started praying more. I started praying the Rosary more. I started talking to God more. Started taking adoration hours. Walsh operates in 8-week terms rather than 16-week semesters. So the second term, I had taken 3 holy hours. One of them was on Mondays from 7 to 8. One on Tuesdays from 6 to 7. And then another one Thursday morning from 3 to 4 in the morning. So I would wake myself up at like 2 o'clock, go in, take this holy hour. And it was absolutely wonderful. And it got me to peace, but I still felt like I could be doing more. So I looked up this video online, like how to make a rosary. And I'm just like, you know what? This could be fun. This could just be like a silly little thing that I do. And I go online. I'm like, okay, this looks relatively easy. So I go online. I buy some parts. They were selling granite beads, like in packs of 60 for like $1.20. Like they was completely on sale. This was absolutely wonderful. I'm just like, ooh, I can have a granite rosary. This is cool. So I get all the granite that they were selling. I got some check glass to go along with it, just to make it look pretty. And I made myself a rosary. And I'm like, okay, I have enough to make a second one. So I text my friend who had told me to eat her rosaries just a year or two earlier. And I'm just like, hey, which one of these crucifixes do you like the best? Like I ordered some crucifixes randomly online to make these things. And she's like, oh, I like this one. So I make her the rosary and I'm just like, hey, can you meet me over by the music center at Walsh? And she's like, yeah. So I go over to her and I'm just like, hey, I need you to close your eyes and extend out your hand. So she does. And I'm like, all right, my friend, eat this. And she's like, no, Tom, I can't. It's so beautiful. And I'm just like, yes, yes,
I win.
I won. But I still remember the smile on her face. That was a beautiful, beautiful feeling to know that I had made a positive contribution in someone's faith life like that. That made me just really happy. And she also was like, oh, this is really pretty. Like, you could start selling these. And I'm just like, I don't think I need to start selling these. Like, this was just kind of a thing that I started doing for fun. Then I started carrying it around more at other campus ministry events that I was going to. And eventually some people were like, no, I'll buy one off of you. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So I started making rosaries as a business then. And eventually, like, I just kind of kept running with it because people just kind of heard, like, oh yeah, he's the rosary guy. Like my buddy Jeff, his rosary had broken. He's like, hey, can you fix this? I'm like, yeah, sure, I can try. And I don't know. I just became the rosary repairman, rosary builder. And all of this was still being done while I was a Protestant, mind you. Like at that point, like I was going through the process of like becoming Catholic. Like I was talking with the priest and all this stuff. I'm just like, I've went through RCIA, but I'm not in a place to convert just yet. And now I am in a place to convert. So what can we do here? So I was going through the process of that, but I'm technically still Protestant because, like, you know, I'm not Catholic at this point. So at this point, I'm just like, all right, so let's see. I am a Protestant who has went to Latin Mass, makes rosaries for people, attends adoration, attends the 3 a.m. hour. Yeah, no, I'm Catholic at this point. Like at some point I just kind of needed to accept it. And I'm just like, I'm doing all the Catholic things. I'm being what many other Catholics have openly admitted they want to be. And I'm just like, I just kind of need to accept it at this point. So on Divine Mercy Sunday, 2024, I get confirmed into the church. It was a really great time. I got to taste Jesus for the first time. He tastes a lot like victory. It's firm, but a little bit sweet. You have to look for the sweetness, but it's still there. And maybe it just might be the oils that they put on my head, and like some of it was on my thumb because I was trying to wipe it off. And like I don't know if it's just the oils, but like that first time tasting the Eucharist tasted exactly like victory. It was genuinely wonderful, and yeah, that was not my only victory in April. Walsh was having this small business competition through our entrepreneurship club called The Garage. They had gotten $10,000 from a group called the Nolan Family, and the top prize got $5,000. And I competed for that money, and I won first prize. So I pitched my rosary business. I told them my story of how I was a incoming Catholic. By that point, I'd only been Catholic for like a week and a half. So it was one of those things where I'm just like, yeah, no, I'm not super established in the Catholic market yet. We're still kind of working on that. Also, another funny story about the rosary business is it was actually started on theft. So
Oh no.
yeah, so I bought all the parts, but I forgot to buy like the pliers necessary to like actually make it. So I went home one week, and when no one was looking, I went into the garage, stole a pair of pliers from my dad, and started making these rosaries. I eventually, he's like, I showed him the pliers that I was using to make them one time, and he's just like, hey, I've been looking for those. Yeah. I'm just like, do you want them back? He's like, consider it my donation to your business. I'm just like, thanks, Dad. So now it's just kind of figuring out, like, what is being Catholic like? How do I want to be Catholic in my larger community? Like, I think I've settled on the parish of, like, and when I say settled, I just mean, like, I know where I want to go for Mass in terms of, like, I think I want to start going to Little Flower Parish, but with that also being said, like, nothing is concrete just yet. So we're still trying to figure all this stuff out, and that's kind of where we are now.
It's part of the fun.
It's like I figured out the hard part is like, what do I want to do? But now comes the fun part in how I do it. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing like that story. It's awesome to see how God can work through people, and how like you at one point weren't even Catholic, but you were more Catholic than like a lot of Catholics. It was just crazy. It was super cool. But real quick, before we go too far past it, what's the name of your company for your rosaries?
Yeah, so it's called Project 27 Ministries. So Project 27, the name comes from the fact that there are 20 different mysteries that you can pray with the rosary. 5 luminous, joyful, sorrowful, and glorious. In addition to that, I'm also a huge sucker for the 7 Sorrows Rosary. I absolutely love it more than anything else. It's one of my favorite prayers I get to do. So I included the 7 Sorrows in my count for like the mysteries that I want to evangelize people on. So that's where the name Project 27 comes from.
Don't you have a rosary with 27 decades?
Yeah, so, okay, so another thing that made me more Catholic than all the Catholics at Walsh was I made a rosary that was, when it was undone, over 12 feet long. So I made, I actually prayed it one night when I was taking over an adoration hour, and this thing is very cumbersome to use. It's huge. So it has all 20 decades that you need, plus the 7 Sorrows on there because, again, love the 7 Sorrows. And it got to a point where it was like, I was getting phone calls from people. I was in the chapel so long. Like, eventually I had to, like, stop praying, and I had to take a look at my phone, and I'm just like, hello? And they're just like, did you just wake up? I'm like, no, I'm currently in the chapel right now. And they're like, hey, can you talk real quick? I'm just like, I'm kind of in the middle of something.
I'm with Jesus, okay? We're
like, I'm with Jesus right now. And they're like, wait, did Emmy not take her holy hour? I'm like, no, she took her holy hour. Like, I'm just here praying. Like, can I not do that? Like, I didn't realize I was supposed to kick myself out when somebody else came in the chapel.
It's a good Catholics do. Hour.
Also sit in the back pews at Mass. I'm pretty sure that's another good thing to do.
It's in the handbook you get. But yeah, I remember he like put it like this little box down, and then just open it, and just it's the biggest rosary I've ever seen. I was like, wow, it's a rosary.
Yeah, I was really bored. I was really, really bored. Here's the thing: people are like, "Did you do it because like you felt called by God to do it?" I'm just like, "No, I was just really bored, and I didn't." Orders were slow that week. Like it was kind of one of those things where I'm just like, I want to do something to drum up support for the business. Like,
how long did it take you to make that?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it took me about 3 hours all said and done, which that's not bad given the fact that the first rosary I learned how to make, I think that one took me about 2 hours. So the process had like grown a lot faster at that point. So
do you do chain link ones or?
Yeah, so I get eye pens. I got a lot of them when they were on sale on my supplier's website. They were selling them, I think, 360 eye pens, which makes about 6 rosaries for about $1 at that point. So I'm sitting here like I just got a ton of them when I realized that I was going to do this as a business, and that has saved an incredible amount of money on these things. A lot of fun, really enjoy doing it. I've also I like the idea that I can work with metal. That's the other thing. Like, I see the string ones and I'm just like, these things are nice, but it's also one of those things where it's like, I want metal. Like, that feels very manly, you know? Like,
In the Catholic cradle world, I think we always kind of view those ones like the string ones. Those are like, we call those, at least we did in my family, we called them like First Communion or Reconciliation rosaries, because those are the rosaries that you would get when you would receive your First Communion when you were like 8 years old. But then when you get to confirmation, that's when you kind of like graduate to the big boys. You get the rose-scented ones with the,
Wait.
or like the chain ones.
your rosaries have scents to them?
Oh,
Oh,
you
man,
haven't seen
you guys
this
are
one.
giving me new business ideas.
Yes.
there you go.
No, yeah, look that up. It's actually a very popular thing. I actually have a rose-scented candle that was blessed by Pope Benedict. And it still has it still has the same smell. I think I got it in like 2008 or
Wait,
something like that.
did they sell it to you blessed?
No.
Oh, okay. I
No.
was about to say, I'm pretty sure I'm
No.
pretty sure you can't do that.
No,
Like,
Yeah.
I got it for free. I actually think I did get it for my First Communion from someone in my family. And the Pope came into Washington. I grew up by D.C.
oh, wow.
The Pope came to D.C. and I think it was 2008, and he was just blessing things as he was like going by into we were at the National Basilica, and I just had my rosary and he blessed it. I was like, oh, cool. Now I got
Nice.
a blessed rosary.
That's crazy. We were there at the same time. But
Really?
I
And you
still-
know each
I-
other?
Yeah, I lived in
Yeah.
Illinois. He was in Virginia.
Yeah.
It's crazy how small the world is in that sense. But there's really, I like the manly rosaries, the heavy
Yes.
rosaries. Like,
Yeah.
yes.
You have one, right? You got the soldier rosary?
I don't have a soldier one. That's
Who is that?
I'm pretty sure it's Simon, right?
Simon has.
Simon,
I think he
yes,
has
yeah.
one. He has a huge thick rosary. There's a rosary that his name's Tony. He's been at Vici a couple times.
Yeah.
His rosary, it's so nice, but it's like paracord and like the heaviest metal beads I've ever felt in my entire life. It's like you throw it down, like you could honestly, it's a weapon. It's more than just a spiritual weapon. It's a physical weapon.
Well, that's the thing. Like, when I first made mine out of granite, I literally looked at people. I'm just like, yeah. So Brotherhood taught me that rosaries can be a weapon. I agree.
Yeah. It's like,
Oh my gosh.
um,
Well, dude, you just brought back some memories, because I mean, I remember when I was a little kid and like we would be sitting around the living room. I'm like 7 or 6 years old at this point, and we're praying the rosary. And as a little kid, praying the rosary is tough, obviously.
Oh yeah.
I think as a kid, I just always pretended that like the rosary was like a sword. Like at the top, the cross was like a sword, or it was like a snake that was like slithering around like the couch or something like that, or it could be a fantastic like sling. You could pretend it was a sling. You could like twirl it around and like pretend that you're David throwing a stone at Goliath. There's just so many things.
You like the ones that like would open up.
yeah.
Yeah, and those
Those
are
were sick.
damage.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But I was curious about like the relic thing. So now obviously you had that experience with as a Protestant, as someone who doesn't understand. I can only imagine the other thoughts going through your head. But as now you've become Catholic and maybe done a little more research into them, like has your opinion changed a little bit about that?
So the fact that I felt a chill go down my spine, no, my opinion has not changed on that at all. Like, I am very much like, wow, that was a lot. That was definitely throwing me in the deep end. But in terms of like relics as a concept overall, I absolutely love it. So like, I've done a little bit of research into like the history of like where relics have come from, and I think it's a really neat process. Obviously, don't sell them. I can't believe I have to say that, but I was looking online at one point and I saw somebody who was selling relics when I was looking for rosary parts, and I literally copy and pasted the link of the relics that they were selling. I sent it into my campus ministry group chat, and I'm just like, hey guys, just a heads up, like this is one of the people that I get my rosary parts from, and they're selling relics. This is making me really, really angry. Please tell them to knock it off.
Yeah.
So here I am, like, I'm getting like this campus ministry like really riled up over like
Yeah, because I didn't realize that people sell relics.
Yeah, no. So like, and again, there are loopholes into how you do it. So it's one of those things where it's like, if the relic is encased in something like, say, a piece of glass, or
You're selling the glass.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so like you're just selling something that contains a relic. You're not necessarily selling the relic itself. There's a order, I forget who it was. I think they're Carthusian. There is an order of Carthusians who I think sells like cases that have relics in them of certain saints, and like they're like, no, we're not selling relics. We're selling like cases that contain the relics, and like, this is legal under canon law. You don't have to come after us. You don't have to worry about reporting us to Rome. Like, we'll be okay. And I'm just sitting here like, it feels a little bit like a loophole. But with that also being said, like, you got to do what you got to do. I think like, for a lot of people, having a relic, having something that is a piece of a saint, that is powerful. Like, that is a really powerful thing. Like, again, like, I think about the idea of just like, every altar has a relic in it for the most part. Like, I don't know if that's changed though, right? Like, I don't think it has that changed, or
I believe so.
Okay, so like, every altar has to have a relic in it in some way. So it's like,
theoretically, yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like, every altar has a piece of a saint who's come before us, who's lived for Christ, who died for Christ, and not necessarily like someone stoned them to death, but like, they died on their breath, like, having lived for Jesus and having lived for the truth. That's a really powerful witness. Like, I can understand why early Christians wanted to have pieces of the martyrs with them. Like, that's where this came from. Like, early Christians were just grave robbers, more or less. Like, they went into the tombs of martyrs and people who had large cult followings, and they would take pieces of the saint and they would just keep them on them, because they believed like the holiness of the saints would like be transfigured onto them. And that's a really powerful witness. And again, I think that's a great tool. And if you think that's something that can help you, absolutely use it. But I don't necessarily know if I need to go on a world tour and like turn my rosary into like a third class relic of like 20,000 different
all the saints.
Yeah, I don't know if I personally need to do that, but like, hey, if you want to do that, like, I will happily sell you that rosary that you
link in description.
Yes, link in the description.
Yeah. No, that's why, like, I've said this before on the podcast. I think like we need to be looking to saints way more than we are now. Growing up, I didn't really have anybody to look up to. Like, you knew of the saints, but I never was actively looking at the saints as examples, as role models. And like, they're real people, just like you and me.
Oh yeah,
that was funny. I didn't mean to even
nice plug.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't mean to do that. And they're just people that have gone through the same things we're doing, and they had the same goal, and they got to that. They achieved their goal. Why don't we look to them more often? Why aren't we making more movies for them? Why aren't we making more videos? That's why El Ray of Hope has started making videos, like AI videos, showing the saints in their lives and giving a little bit of their story. And they're fantastic because it's using a medium that everyone's using now, easy to digest.
Oh yeah,
and to promote the saints' lives. It's beautiful.
Well, that's my thing. Like I said, I talked about like the Acts of Paul and Thecla, and like I kind of downplayed like how big Thecla was in my story of conversion. Like, this girl's story is nuts. So Thecla is one of the first saints that we have in the early church. So the story goes, at least according to the text, that she had seen Paul preach for about 3 days on the importance of like, you don't necessarily need to be married. You can actually live a chaste life, and like, it's just as good, if not better, than like potentially being married. Now, Thecla is engaged to this dude named Thymierius, and after listening to Paul preach for 3 days, she's like, Thymierius, I love you, but like, no thanks. So she walks away from Thymierius, and Thymierius is not having any of it. So he gets Paul and Thecla arrested, and Thecla is so inspired by Paul's faith that eventually he just goes on, like, she kisses the chains of Paul, and they're both about to be executed. They're about to be burned at the stake. God sends down rain, so they leave. It's worth noting that we don't have the full text, so it's one of those things where it's like, if it seems like the story kind of bounces all over the place, that's part of the reason why. So they go on out to Antioch, and Thecla is approached by this guy named Alexander. Now, Alexander looks at Paul and is like, yo, Paul, she with you? And Paul's like, I have no idea who this woman even is. Be my guest. So remember, this is the 1st century, so there's no need for pickup lines. There's no need for any of this. Alexander just goes up and just starts kissing Thecla. Thecla is not having any of this, so she rips off his clothes, which, I feel like that's sending some mixed signals, but hey, that's just me. So they're not having any of this. So Alexander reports Thecla to Rome, and she's about to be eaten in the Colosseum. They send out a male lion, a female lion, and a bear. Thecla befriends the female lion because girl power, and that's not the official reason given, but that's essentially what it is. And they just get done with it. The female lion kills the male lion and the bear, and the female lion also dies, and Thecla remains perfectly alive. It's perfectly fine. They try to kill her a few more times, and it just fails every time. It gets to a point where the people who are trying to kill her realize that the audience is dying faster than she is, so they just kind of give up, and Thecla eventually finds Paul. They reunite, and Thecla goes off to start her own monastic society. I've seen some sources say that she's one of the first monastics that we have. There's actually a monastery called the Mar Thecla Monastery that's used by the Orthodox, like where she apparently started her first monastery, and like they continue to keep it alive. So she's still a saint that affects a lot of people. And again, like I said, a lot of people didn't know about her when I first started doing research about the early church. A lot of people were just like, oh, like if you want to get to know the saints, like start with Augustine or start with Saint Therese of Lisieux or Mother Teresa. And it would always be those three saints. It would always be those three. It would never be anybody else. It would always be, oh no, look at Augustine, look at Mother Teresa, and look at Saint Therese of Lisieux. I want to look at someone else other than those three because I've already done that. And they didn't necessarily move me in the same way they moved everyone else. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to say that I was trying to be different, but I was trying to find my own saints that like could speak to me in a way that like I needed to be spoken to.
Yeah.
So Thecla's really bizarre story somehow spoke to me. And like the reason why is because it begot a lot of questions. Like, why did any of this happen? Who wrote this? Why did they write this? We have a theory as to who wrote it. This early church writer named Tertullian stated like it was some presbyter from Asia Minor who had written this story down, and I'm sitting here like, dude, why don't you name drop the guy? Like, if you know who it is, why aren't you name dropping him? You're an early church father. That's your whole shtick. Listen to me. Tertullian wrote an entire treatise on this guy named Marcion. Marcion was a early Gnostic Christian. Yeah, you know exactly who I'm talking about.
Who Marcion is.
Yeah. So for our viewers at home who may not know who Marcion is just the worst person. Like, I'm talking just an awful human being. He believed that the God of the Old Testament and that the God of the New Testament were actually completely different people, and the God of the Old Testament was actually evil, and Jesus came to destroy him. So that was...
He was the world's first anti-Semite.
Yeah, no, it was actually kind of awful. So Tertullian writes a treatise called Against Marcion. It's 5 books long. He dedicated 5 books to destroying one dude. That level of hatred is kind of impressive. And he starts it out by being like, oh yeah, no, the Black Sea where he lives is just this terrible place. It's always cold. There's no civilization out there. All the people out there are mean. Like, they're frustrating. There's no civilization. It's cold. But you know what? The worst part about this place, there is nothing more barbarous and sad in Pontus than the fact that Marcion was born there. Like...
It's almost worse than like the Drake and Kendrick beef right now.
Oh my God! Listen to me. They're taking notes on this. Yeah. Here's the thing: the early church fathers just wrote diss tracks on each other, and I'm just sitting here like, this is how Christianity was founded. Like,
bars.
That's something that I think is really, really overlooked. Is like that there's this certain sense of fervor that you find inside the old church fathers, and mothers, obviously, right? Just in the patristics, right? There's this like big Christian fervor where they were not scared to just call something out, and they weren't scared to call it out in a big way. Like, right. And it's the same case with all of them. Like Saint Athanasius has a great rant about Arian, right? Or Saint Justin Martyr. I don't know if you've ever read his dialogue with Trypho.
I have not.
Okay, it's a fantastic read because Trypho is a Jew, and Justin Martyr is converting him.
Yeah.
In the very gentle Christian way of telling him that he's going to hell if he doesn't convert.
Very gentle.
Yeah. But it's just really funny because the thing that you find shared in all these things is this big fervor, right? Like this true love for their faith, and they're not scared to defend it. And it feels really refreshing, right? Compared to kind of nowadays. Now, obviously, there are some stipulations, it nowadays everything is too rough. You never would be rough on someone, but it's just that, I don't know. I don't know if that's how you felt reading the old. So the old readings.
So I will be honest with you, it was shocking because at that time, my primary faith experience was we need to be nice to people. We need to be gentle to people. I came from a more mainline Protestant church where it was being kind, being accepting, being all these different things was mostly packaged in we need to be calm, docile, not necessarily ruffling too many feathers. So to see the early church fathers just being there is nothing in Pontus more barbarous and sad than the fact that Marcion was born here. I'm just oh my goodness, you guys are the worst Christians ever. What kind of awful people are you? So it was one of those things where it was an eye opener. It was shocking. And shocking at first not in a great way, because I'm just sitting here oh my gosh, the Catholic Church is just full of a bunch of jerks. What are these people saying these things about me? I know there are some people who have some pretty choice words sometimes. So I'm sitting here am I next? But over time, I kind of started to think about it more and more, and I started to reflect on it. And the difference between being nice and being kind of came through in that regard. So it's one of those things where it's sometimes being kind to people, you don't always get to be nice to them. Mm. Being nice is really about being pleasant. It's about not pushing people to think that you're being rude. It's saying the things that people want to hear. Mm. Kindness sometimes is about saying things that people need to hear. I think that my mother and my dad are some of the kindest people I've ever met. They're not always very nice, but they are some of the kindest people I've ever met, because they say what I need to hear. They're saying yo, you need to do the right thing. You need to be a better person. You need to practice empathy. You need to do all these different things, even when it's really, really hard and I don't necessarily want to hear it. That's kindness. It's pushing people to holiness, even if they really don't want to. Mm. Now, I think that sometimes as a church, we can be kinder in a nicer way. I think that that just because you're being a kind person doesn't necessarily excuse how you choose to go about things. And I'll be honest with you, I think there are times where, especially me, where I've been I'm saying what people need to hear, but I'm not saying it in a way that they can hear. And I'm not saying it in a way that they need to hear it. Mm. So it's one of those things where it's I got the kindness thing down, but I need to be a little bit nicer about it. No,
100%. That's one thing that we've noticed, having conversations with a lot of converts, is where Catholics could be looked at as they're trying to help you get to where you need to be, but they're just coming off in a way that's it's just not finding that balance in it,
right? And
to have grace in it, to love people, and to, even what Caitlin talked about, not treating people as projects,
yes,
but treating them as an actual person, meeting them where they're at.
I honestly want Caitlin to come to Walsh and give a talk on that. I listened to that podcast episode that you guys did in preparation for this, because I'm just okay, I need to make sure that I'm not saying anything that's too wild, too crazy, even though I'll say some wild stuff at the end, don't worry. But yeah, what Caitlin said about not treating people as a project, not assuming you need to fix them, if you will. That's a tough balance to strike, because it's you want to expose people to the Catholic Church. So you need to show them that the Catholic Church is a better way than what people are currently doing. But you also don't want to come off as arrogant. You don't want to come off as rude. You don't want to come off as bashful, because then people will believe, okay, even if this is better, I might not become a better Christian because I might become more rude, bashful, and boastful of what I have here in this faith. And that's a tough balance to strike. I don't envy people who are trying to get converts. There the conversion process at Walsh was not always easy. And again, like, I think 95% of the mistakes that were made in genuinely good faith. I think it was people who were genuinely trying to do the right thing, people who were genuinely like, hey, I want to help, I just don't know how, because I don't have the maturity behind me and like the know-how and the understanding to like fully convert people. And it's one of those things where it's like, even though a lot of that has really hurt me at times, I understand the fact that it's like we're all trying to grow in faith. We're all trying to be better. And what makes matters harder is like there is that 5% of the time where people are not trying to convert people for the right reasons. They're trying to do it because they're insecure about their own faith. They're trying to do it because they want to make themselves right. They want to do it for the wrong reasons. And that can really hurt the other 95% who I think are doing it correctly. And I don't know. That's one of those things where it's like campus ministry and I have had that rocky relationship, and I feel really bad about it because I know most of them there are genuinely trying to do the right thing. But man, the ones that aren't really make it hard for the rest. And I feel really bad because, again, like, I'm sure your guys' own experience, you've noticed like 95% of the Catholics are rock stars. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're trying to grow in their faith. They're trying to love people as they need to be loved. Man, that 5% that don't really care, that can be really hard and can make all of our jobs a little bit harder in trying to build the kingdom of God, you know?
Sometimes those are the loudest too. That's the part that can hurt, because if you have this group of people who are doing a really good job, but they're staying more quiet and more disciplined with it, and people are just yelling, it's like, whoa, what are you doing? That's why I noticed like sometimes but some of the people who are doing like Catholic social media, they are taking the more aggressive approach of taking every argument and debunking it and making you feel like, oh, you believe this? Oh, you know nothing. Or going to people having like altercations.
Right.
And it's like, okay, you got your point across. That was for your ego.
Right.
Where did the kingdom of God come from that? And that's where we need to humble ourselves, die to ourselves. It's not about us, about pushing your agenda or whatever. It's about letting God do his work through people. And a lot of the time, it doesn't mean going out and preaching. Right. It means living your faith truly. Like, we've all met those people where you're like, okay, why are they so joyful, and how do I become like that? Well, I want what they have. That is some of the most powerful conversion, what you can do to convert people. And that's what we need to be focusing on.
And here's the thing.
Easy.
Shout out to a lot of the people at Walsh who, when I look at them, I am genuinely convinced that their faith is real. Like the campus minister who was there for a long time and has since gone into hospital ministry is doing great things there. Genuine joy there. Shout out to Eva May, Kelbley now, I believe. She just got married. Congratulations. Yep. Congratulations to you. And like, also thank you for like just being a genuinely honest to good witness to the faith. Yes. Shout out to my sponsors, Kale and JP, Troy, like all these different people who are like, were a part of my faith community. The Blaywas family. Yes. Love you guys. Seriously, they are some of the best people I've ever met. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Like,
Blaywas. By the way, shout out Max Kelbley too.
Yes, Max, I love you too, dude.
Yeah. It's okay. You can point at that.
We have all these.
We don't.
We
got to get Max on
Max
here.
and I have not talked very much, and like I kind of want to fix that, if I'm being honest with you. He seems like a really cool guy.
He's an incredibly smart individual. He's written a few books.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, I was reading a book that he read, but I didn't finish it, so I'm sorry, Max.
Before we get him on, well, actually, you finish it, and then they give you the spark notes.
I don't have it anymore. Someone gave it to me, and I gave it back. I don't know who was. I think I had his book. I don't know. I need to recheck now.
Yeah, but that's super important. People have impact, and we need to always remember that. And being a Catholic, just being a good person in general, you have to be conscious of what you're doing in every space, where you go, what you're doing, what you're wearing, the music you're playing with your windows down. It's right. Every little thing you do, you're being judged. It's being by someone perceiving what you're doing, and it's really important.
So this is something like, can I just give some advice to like all our?
Yeah, okay. That's your camera, by the way.
Okay, so to all the Catholics out there, if there is a Protestant who comes into your midst, whether it be like they came to Mass at church or they came to your campus ministry, they're listening. They're listening to you. They're listening to all the nice things that you say. They're listening to all the kind things that you say. They're listening to the joy that you exude, but they're also listening to things that maybe you don't want them to hear. They're listening to you when you say things that aren't true about Protestants. They're listening to you when you say all Protestants believe and follow it up with something that not all Protestants believe. They're listening to you with all of that. And one other piece of advice, just generally speaking, if you start a statement with all Protestants believe, you're probably wrong. Can we please just stop saying that? Like, I'm sorry, that's just a big pet peeve of mine that honestly, like 20% of the statements at Walsh that have just driven me absolutely nuts have started with all Protestants believe. And honestly, if we could just stop those statements, I think that we would honestly be in a much better place with the church, especially if we replace those statements with, hey, you're a Protestant. What do you believe? If we replace it with a declarative statement and replace it with a question, I think we're going to get a lot of people who might be skeptical about the church to open up to it.
Yeah.
So
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking in absolutes like that is kind of rough. And
only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Brian's a big Star Wars guy.
We're not going to get sued for Disney for using that, right?
No, we'll be okay.
Brian, I don't like that look you're giving me right now. just got it from the episode.
yeah. No, but that's actually beautiful because it's true, and it's hard for like for me being a cradle Catholic. I never really understood Protestants, and that's what I'm really trying to understand them more. That's why I really enjoy having converts on the podcast, so I can kind of understand where they're coming from, and then also use that. Say, okay, so this is their story. This is what worked for them. How can I try to replicate that? And we're also trying to put on a Christian like rap concert at a Protestant church, and we're calling it Fuse because it's fusing that all together. It's just all about just the person of Jesus and having a good time as a community as Christians.
Good.
And I'm really excited about it. It could be really, really cool. It could be really. It's just I never thought I'd be.
So do we have like a date for this? Like
June 29th.
June 29th.
June 29th. We're confirming the venue on Monday.
Okay.
So it'll be like this 2 weeks. This will come out in 2 weeks. So we'll see how that works out. But we have a couple people confirmed. We have like Kempton. He's an awesome Christian rapper out of Kansas City.
Oh wow.
Colby, who was on this podcast, he'll be here. And then we have a couple others we're still working on. One of the guys I'm really hoping we can get is Mike McGallis. He has a really big following on Instagram. Really cool guy. So it's really, really fun. But that's what's really been putting on my heart in the last year since we've been doing this podcast is figuring out a way to find common ground with Christians.
Yes.
And Protestants, because it's there. It all stemmed from one thing, and it just kind of started to got lost a little bit. So trying to like what the Zach said in the podcast will be coming out tomorrow, but like 2 weeks ago, is taking all the dump and the trash that have been kind of thrown on the faith and everything, and just kind of shoveling that away and getting back to the root of it and what we actually need to be doing. And so really, really trying to do that, and that's what this podcast is awesome to do. It's been really, really fun. It's really been a really good time with it.
Yeah, I mean, any faith, any way that you can promote people to talk to one another, promote people to just get in conversation, get in community with one another, that's the best way to do it. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's one of the big things about the Catholic Church that I absolutely love, is that our faith is not just an island that maybe like comes into contact with other islands in nominal ways, and like those islands maybe impact each other, but like they don't have to. In many respects, we are one body worshiping God. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if the liver is not working the way that the liver should be working, it affects the rest of the body. Now we have a little bit more power to help the liver than, say, the human body might have to help itself. But that kind of is to say we are a community in Christ. And it's one of those things where it's like, that's what I love about it, is like you get to meet all these new community members. I love being able to go just about anywhere that I've been, and I can relate to a lot of people based on what my theology is, and like that shared common background. Yeah. But it's also one of those things where it's like, I also understand, like when I talk with my brothers and sisters who are Protestant, like I don't always know what they believe. Right. There's over 10,000 different recognized traditions in the Protestant faith. And even if they belong to a certain denomination, that doesn't necessarily mean that they follow what that denomination preaches.
Right.
I'll be honest with you. When I was Lutheran, I didn't necessarily know about all of the dogmatic stuff. I didn't necessarily know all of the dogmas. I knew enough of them that it impacted my life. Like the concept of faith alone. That's something that I really lived by.
Right.
Like, and I don't always think that people will understand like how faith alone can really affect the way that you, these theologies, like they affect the way that you live. Like as a Catholic, something I'm noticing is that since I believe in confession, I have to make a larger effort to go to confession. And it's also one of those things where it's like, I typically work on Saturdays. And a lot of parishes in this area offer confession on Saturdays from like 2 to 3. And I'm sitting here like, I get off at like 4 o'clock sometimes. So it's one of those things where I'm just sitting here like, I need to make a more active effort to get out and get to confession when I'm dealing with it. And like, because I'm a Catholic, like I'm signing on to that. But like as a Protestant who believed in faith alone, it's just like, hey God, I'm really sorry that I've done all these sinful things. Like I know I'm a terrible person, but I'm really trying to do better.
Yeah.
Like it's if you truly believe, you're just going to be sorry. You don't need a priest to do that. And another way like that it can affect you is like your faith, at least in the Lutheran tradition, faith begets good works. So if you're not doing good works, does that mean you're really a good believer? So it's one of those things where it's like, I had a period in college where I wasn't doing a lot of good of any kind. And I was recognizing that. I'm like, I believe in Jesus, but like, I'm not doing the good works. So do I not really believe in Jesus? And I was having like this whole crisis about it. And it's one of those things where it's like, this can be a very real thing where it's like, is your faith real? How do you know it's real? Like, do you just believe it in your heart? Do you just believe it in... And it's like, well, what if you believe wrong? Like, these are things that like people can feel. And like, some people take advantage of this. There's a reason why megachurch pastors have a job. There's a reason why Joel Osteen and all these...
Kenneth Copeland.
Yes, Kenneth Copeland. Thank you for reminding me of one of my least favorite people in all of Christianity. I will stand by that. There was a video on Lutheran satire called "The Devil's Kenneth Copeland Suit." I'm recommending that video to everyone watching the podcast right now. It is very, very funny. I'm not saying that like it's true, but if it turned out to be, I wouldn't be surprised by it. But it's one of those things where it's like, people who are insecure about their faith can be taken advantage of when they have that theology. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, if you truly believe in Jesus, like, you should just give me money because like Jesus is telling me to tell you to give me your money.
And if you give me money, then God will give you back tenfold the amount of money that you give me.
Exactly. Like the only reason
the prosperity gospel.
Yeah, the prosperity gospel survives on the notion of faith alone.
Yes.
Like you could make an argument like all Protestants believe in faith alone, but you also have to consider the fact that Calvinists believe that like predestination is a thing. You have to consider the fact that it's like, okay, so faith alone isn't necessarily something that all Protestants believe in. And it's like, maybe they do, but like there's some conditions attached to it. So it's one of those things where it's like, you have to be careful with what you say in terms of like all Protestants believe this. And even if they do, how does that inform the way that you go about talking to them, converting them? Like, how does that affect their daily patterns? And that's one of those things where it's like, I've told people at Walsh, I'm just like, yeah, no, like my theology has caused me to act differently than the way that you guys would. And they're like, that's so fascinating. Why don't you talk about this more often? I'm like, none of you ever asked.
and I'm talking about it now.
Yeah, I'm talking about it now. So thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I think you said something before. You were talking about some of the saints and stuff like that and how, you know, the bodies and the relics. And these were all things that were really big witnesses to just the general faith of Christianity, right? This kind of goes along with what Mike was saying earlier about, you know, the purpose of this podcast is like, you know, people need to continue to have conversations. You said before, like, as well, you've said a lot of great things. One of them was asking people questions kind of causes them to open up a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But also forces them to have a conversation, right? And conversations like these are in some sense a witness, right? It is a witness. It's a testimony. It's a thing that forces someone to think about their faith a little bit more, right? Because they see your story and they're like, how does this apply to me? In the same way that we kind of look at saints, we're like, how does that person's life apply to me, right? With anything in general, how does this apply to me? Does this make me think about my faith, right? It's the reason why stuff like this is so important. It needs to be continued to be had, right?
Yeah. And one thing I like that you said too, like this has been actually awesome, and you said figuring out what they believe and understanding them as a person, because you can't if not saying this goes back to not trying to treat them as a project, but saying you want to try to get to the root and figure out how you possibly could have an impact on their heart with conversion. It's like a doctor. Doctor doesn't come in and just goes, here's a medication. You ask questions and you figure out kind of what's going on. Where could the disconnect be? What might be holding up? Like Zach it was like faith and works were a big thing. A lot of people, it's Mary.
Yeah.
Saints, like the Eucharist. Like there's certain things that they're more common holdups, but you can't go into a conversation and just be like, okay, I'm going to hammer the Eucharist here. And they could already believe. A lot of Protestants believe in the true presence,
right?
Which I was thought was really, really cool. And then you're just like okay, they're like, whoa, like we're on the same team here. I understand.
Yes,
and that's really, really important. What you said is to meet them where they are, figure out what they believe in, and again with empathy and love.
Yes. And
speaking in your tonality is so important.
So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm a very inquisitive guy by nature. I love asking questions. My big thing is I need to learn to not always treat it like an interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
That is my downfall. That is my big thing. It's I love to ask questions. I like to get to the root of the things. But sometimes I need to understand the fact that it's you're not just getting to the root of what a person believes. You're getting to the root of how does this person operate? And if it's just you asking questions and it's not you giving a part of yourself, that's not building a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's just as much treating people like a project than it is just if you were just declaring their faith right at them. It's one of those things where it's just because you're curious doesn't make you noble. That's something that is very hard for me because I'm a very curious person. I love to learn these new things, and my whole, I guess, personal fable of what makes me a good Catholic is that I am curious and I'm willing to ask those questions, and I like being in these uncomfortable scenarios where I don't necessarily know if the right answer is going to be the Catholic Church or not. But so far, every time I put myself in a position where I've had to ask that question, I've gotten to the right answer. And this is something that many of my Catholic brothers and sisters at Walsh have struggled with. I talked about the fact that I love doing research. I like doing research in the other church, whether it be about Thecla or about the Inquisitions. Well, at one point I was thinking about doing some research on Vatican II and being was this a good thing or not? And when I was telling my girlfriend at the time about it, she's like, well, you're going to find that it's going to be a good thing, right? And I'm just like, well, I mean, probably. But with that also being said, I don't necessarily know yet. Let me do the research first and I'll get back to you. And it's one of those things where it's just there's that level of I'm curious and I'm excited to get into this uncomfortable territory of figuring out what were the pros, what were the cons, and is it just interpretation at this point? But it's also one of those things where it's for many other people, it's just you have to understand that this is a part of who they are. So to tell them that a part of who they are might potentially be wrong or might be have some flaws to it. That can be akin to attacking them themselves. And that's something that I personally haven't had to deal with too much as a Protestant, where it's just if you attack a Protestant tradition, most Protestants probably won't be very offended by it. Obviously the pastors will probably be a little bit ticked, but if you look at a Lutheran and just be hey, I'm not a big fan of the way Luther said this in Bondage of the Wills, I don't think a lot of them are probably going to be very offended by it. But if you say to a Catholic, hey, I think Mother Teresa did something wrong here, you're going to get a lot of people mad at you. That's quintessential on the list of phrases you should not text Catholic women. It's hey, I think Mother Teresa would disagree with you on this thing. That's a no-go. So it's one of those things where it's just finding out, okay, how do I approach this with love and a relationship, but also speaking the truth? And again, that balance looks different for every single person that you talk to, which is really hard because I'm just like, I would like there to be a pattern, please. Just like it be consistent.
But it never is. And
exactly.
But you mentioned that list of things not to say to Catholic women. Can you give us the top 5 things not to say to Catholic women?
All right, let's take a look. So obviously, Happy Reformation Day has to be. It has to be one. Like, it inspired all of it. I would say Little Leo X is probably not a good one. So Pope Leo X was Pope during the Protestant Reformation. He's the one who excommunicated Luther, like was really big into indulgences. So I created a running joke where I refer to him as Little Leo X, and he came out with his new song, Old Town Indulgences. I photoshopped his face onto
Lil Nas X.
Lil Nas X, and I just blacked out the Old Town Road and just made it Old Town Indulgences. A lot of people got really mad at that. And I will say this, when I was doing research into like the Protestant Reformation, it is really hard to support the church throughout any of it because it's basically evangelization gone horribly wrong. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, when they were writing the excommunication for Luther, they had a couple different routes that they could go about it. The canon lawyers wanted to throw a trial at Luther, and everyone else who was in the church was like, no, we're not doing a trial because you're clearly just doing that to build up yourselves and build up your own careers. We're not doing this again. Like, we're going to leave people who want to grow in the church. Like, that's an Inquisition thing. If you want to, like, prosecute people who are not a fan of the church, join the Inquisitions. So, the trial was out. So, Cardinal Cajetan, who was in charge of this committee, is like, okay, I'm going to go out, and I want to gather all the facts on Luther. I want to listen to everything that he's been saying, everything that he's been doing. Yeah, and then Little Leo X decided to get this guy that Luther debated named Johann Eck involved. And Eck had a completely different idea. Eck was like, how about we just find the 41 most controversial statements that Luther has made, put those in a document, and have that sent to the Pope. And the Pope signs off on, like, these 41 statements are, like, blasphemy, heresy, and just offensive to pious ears. And they didn't clarify which ones were, like, actual heresy and which ones were just, like, offensive. So Pope Leo X signs this document, and Luther looks at it as like, I didn't even write 7 of these. Like, where did you guys get this stuff from? So eventually he was just so furious with this document that rather than like ratifying it or addressing it, he just burned it. He just burned it in the public square and just said, if this is how the church is going to treat me, forget it. I'm done. So he was excommunicated at that point, but I love making fun of it. Unfortunately, it reminds a lot of Catholics of like really painful times in history. And yeah, I bring out the blasphemy in people. That's probably another big one. That was said after reflecting on the Eat My Rosaries comment. Let's see. Number 35. Why is it when I sell indulgences, it's wrong, but when the church does it, it's perfectly fine? So for context, with rosaries, there's something called a pardon crucifix. So the pardon crucifix, when you give it to somebody and they hold it on their person and they do a couple other things with it, they can get a partial indulgence from it. So I gave it to a friend and they're like, you're bribing me with indulgences. I'm like, no, I'm not. And they're like, yes, you are. And I'm just like, oh, so when the church sells indulgences to you, it's perfectly fine. But when I do it, oh no, I can't have that happen. Let's see.
That's a good one.
That one was very funny. That made a lot of people upset. Let's see. Number 73. Wow, this rosary is almost as ugly as you are.
Wow. Hopefully not saying that about one of your own rosaries.
No, I wouldn't.
Who's his competitors?
If I ever see you buy one from like giftcatholic.com, I'm gonna lose it. Like, how dare you? All right, one more. Let's see.
We should have just chosen like 5 random numbers.
Oh, here's the thing. I choose a number between 1 and 100.
the first number. 74.
74. Okay. Number 74. All trad women dress the same, and they do it to confuse Protestants going on.
Oh my god!
I love it.
You said that during the podcast. I'd never thought of that before. But instantly, I had an image in my head. I was like, "Holy cow!"
Yeah, did you just like you just called out all the trad women?
It's like, how have I never noticed that?
Oh yeah,
But it's so true. I used to imagine walking into a Catholic church for the first time. You have no idea what's going on, but you just see like in one pew, just like 12 girls. They're all like they came in the caravan from like the college or whatever.
Yeah.
Just, like, all wearing like the same rose dress.
I'm just sitting here like, is there like a dress code or something that I need? Like, what's going on here?
That is so funny. Holy cow!
I love that you called
You
that
just
out.
called out so many people too.
in the best way.
Yeah.
But this has been absolutely fantastic. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. We like our guests to like leave a final thought, call to action type to our audience. So this will be your time. There's your camera.
Okay, so
Buy my rosaries.
Yeah.
yes, buy my rosaries. You know, Jesus said to like not value money, but I'm going to value it anyway. I'm doing a great job being Catholic, as you guys can very clearly tell. Starting a rosary company on theft as a Protestant, and now chilling for it, wanting more money rather than like to build the kingdom of God. That's about as Catholic as you can get. In all seriousness, you know what? Like the process of building the kingdom of God is a slow process. It can be a hard process, but it is a rewarding process. Sometimes building the kingdom of God, you're building it with other people, and sometimes you're building it in you. Ultimately, the call is yours on where the kingdom of God gets built and how it gets built and how quickly or slowly it does. But irregardless of how quickly or slowly the kingdom of God is built, what matters is at the end of the day is that it is built. And that it brings glory to God in all its ways. So, build the kingdom of God, guys. It's always a good day to do it.
That's absolutely fantastic. And this has been the Just Like You and Me podcast. Thank you, Dom. And we're out.
We're out.
Good deal.